Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our open house. We're so happy that you made it here today. We would like to introduce our speaker, Sidney Shindle, who will be the final speaker of today's open house. Sidney received her undergraduate degree in French and linguistics from UBC. She then decided to follow her passion for health and wellness. She studied at the Institute of Holistic Nutrition in Vancouver. She graduated as a certified nutritional practitioner with honors. And after a long and rewarding career as the head coach of a national level synchronized swimming club, she became a lifelong teacher practitioner where she equips her clients and students with the tools they need to set strong foundations in health, wellness, and beyond. Sidney has combined her passions for working privately with clients, co-founding a corporate wellness company, teaching cooking classes, and co-authoring a sports nutrition course for personal trainers. When Sidney is not teaching or in her consulting practice, you can find her whipping up healthy gluten-free treats and single origin chocolate bars. Sidney is a faculty member at IHN, where she teaches nutrition and health, the fundamentals in the self-paced program, and also comparative diets in our online live program in the Pacific time zone, including professional skills development. Let's welcome Sidney Shindle.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to be sharing more about fasting with you all because fasting is an interesting topic that gets a lot of buzz. And I wanted to separate the buzz today from what maybe you've heard from your friends, maybe you've heard from family members, versus what is actually going to be effective for you. So we're going to dive into this together over the next 45 minutes or so. And we're going to dive into that, the idea of should we all be fasting, or maybe some of us might want to be a little bit more weary of whether or not fasting is right for us. We've heard the news headlines. We probably have seen it on social media, TikTok, Instagram. Maybe your friends have tried intermittent fasting. Maybe you yourself have tried it because you were curious about it. But is it always beneficial? And should everyone be fasting? My question for you is what happens if your body isn't ready for it? Are you open to listening to the signs that maybe this diet might not be right for you? One of the courses that I teach at IHN is Comparative Diets. And I love this course because we go over all of these different dietary patterns and applications. And then we do just that. We think about, does this diet apply to the person sitting in front of us in our office or in our virtual clinic? So today, my goal for us is to explore the science behind fasting. We're going to go over the benefits, but also some of the limitations so we can fully make it an informed choice about whether or not some of us should maybe be trying this, or some of us might want to do some foundational work first, or maybe this is something that you've been working on for a while and you might not have been listening to your bodily signals saying that, hey, fasting might not be right for me right now. So by the end of this talk, I'm hoping you will have an informed decision about whether fasting is right for you. Over the course of this chat, we are going to cover different types of fasting. And when I say fasting, I do want to just make mention of this as fasting as a dietary principle rather than covering religious fasts. Although there's very interesting research around religious fasting, I'm going to be covering fasting as a typical dietary application of time-restricted eating, etc. We're going to go over that shortly. I'm also going to cover the vast benefits of intermittent fasting and alternate day fasting, etc., because there's some amazing research showing the positive benefits of fasting. But then we have to talk about the limitations of fasting. We tend to see a lot of positives and buzzwords in media, or when we hear it from our friends, we don't necessarily always hear about the cons. So I do want to take the time to mention those limitations and discuss some populations of individuals who actually might want to avoid fasting or who should not fast at all. I also want to cover some female specific considerations because there's been a body of new research around this. And the end here is to tell you a little bit about how we as holistic nutritionists can use our principles of holism and natural health and food to actually apply this to fasting. Because here's the thing, for all of these different types of fasts, which I'm going to cover right away, they don't really talk about food except for the warrior diet. Fasting is a voluntary abstinence from food, and this can be a complete fast, or this can be a lower calorie diet, which I'm going to talk about. And it's not necessarily just randomly skipping a meal. There is intention behind this, and there is a structure behind it. And while I have a list here, this doesn't even cover all of the various types of fasting that exist in the world, but here are the most common ones that we see. So we see time restricted eating and intermittent fasting being used interchangeably. And I do want to make a bit of a differentiation between them because there's actually a slight difference. But we see this term time restricted eating. And that's a very good definition of exactly that. You are restricting the time of day or the amount of hours that you are eating. So you are eating all of your meals within a specific limited window every single day. The typical window of eating is somewhere between 8 to 12 hours, although depending on the individual, they might have a 8-hour some day or a 12-hour other day, or they might even start with a 16-hour eating window and then taper it down for circadian rhythm purposes, for stress management purposes, etc. So time restricted eating is the most broad approach that limits the dietary intake to that set number of hours. What's really interesting about time restricted eating, and my favorite researcher on this, her name is Ruth E. Patterson. She does a fantastic job of saying that time restricted eating not only follows this concept of, okay, we're going to eat our meals within this window, but we should do so according to circadian rhythms for optimal metabolic function. So with time restricted eating, the goal is to break your fast when the sun comes up. You should be breaking the fast and eating from sunrise to sunset, and then stopping your fast or stopping your eating window and fasting when the sun goes down. And this seems to be the most optimal way for you to align your eating patterns with your circadian rhythms. This helps the whole body metabolically and so much more, which we will talk about later. The next most common, and to be honest, I think this one is the most common one that I've seen in practice over the years and has gained the most publicity on the internet and over social media, is intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is a type of restricted or time restricted eating, but it follows this window typically of 16-8, meaning that you are fasting for 16 hours and then you have an 8-hour eating window. Typically, how this is done is that you would fast and break your window or break your fast, hence the term breakfast if you've never thought about it that way, but you would break your fast at noon or 1. That's the typical time frame that intermittent fasting is broken, or that fast is broken. And then you would have this 8-hour eating window. Some people will go even further to have an 18-hour fast and a 6-hour eating window, etc. But the difference, or the major difference between intermittent fasting and time restricted eating, is that these individuals who are following IF tend to skip breakfast, and they break their fast noon, 1, 2, sometimes even 3 p.m. And we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of that later on as we go through our discussion here. The next method of fasting is called 5-2. 5-2 is where you eat normally for 5 days out of the week, and then you have a restricted calorie intake for 2 days of the week. Usually, they say that it's about 20 to 25% of your daily caloric needs on those restricted days. Typically, I mean, some people will do it as one meal on those days, and some people might have a couple small snacks. It usually equates to about 400 to 600 calories on those days. The next version is called Eat, Stop, Eat. This is where you fast for 24 hours once or twice a week. So you're doing a full 24-hour fast, and then you resume your normal eating patterns for the rest of the days of the week. They are never done side by side. That's the other big thing about that. Same thing with the 5-2. You're not doing that side by side. You are making sure that they are spread out throughout the week. Another version of fasting is something called alternate day fasting. You are fasting either a restricted calorie or a full fast. It's typically restricted calorie, though, if I'm being honest, every other day. So on that alternate day fasting, it looks quite similar to 5-2, except rather than doing it 2 days a week, you're going every other day, you're doing a calorie restriction. Now, this is something that is definitely hard to maintain long term. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of how these diets work as we go along as well. The last one I wanted to mention is a version of intermittent fasting that is called the warrior diet. Sometimes also aligned itself with 1 meal a day or OMAD. We're not really going to get into that today because I could talk about this for hours, which I do in comparative diets. But the warrior diet is a fast for 20 hours a day, meaning that you have one large meal or 1 meal and a snack in a 4-hour window every single day. So this is a very interesting style of eating that aligns itself with paleo dietary principles. We don't have time to get into paleo at the moment, but in a nutshell, it is a dietary pattern that you are following principles that were in place or foods that would have been available to you prior to the agricultural revolution. So basically anything that could be hypothetically hunted, gathered, foraged, or fished. So you're eating very nutrient dense whole foods, no grains, a lot of animal products and whole food plant products in that 4-hour window. What's interesting to note is that this last diet, the warrior diet, is the only type of fasting where food principles or dietary principles are a part of the diet. In all other fasting, there's no strict dietary principles. And this is interesting. There's some pros to this in the sense where someone can choose to make their choices around what they themselves want to eat. But there's also some cons in the sense where when you break that fast, you can eat whatever you want. And if you've never fasted before, or maybe if you have, when you break a fast, you're hungry. Or when you break your fast with something that you don't necessarily, you shouldn't eat, that can change what you eat in that window. So we're going to talk about that as we get into the latter half and talk about dietary principles from a holistic point of view and how we can elevate our fasting if that's something that we decide to do. Because yeah, there's a lot of interesting research that goes to just have people be put onto a fasting protocol still can show some benefits even when they don't talk about dietary principles. But as holistic nutritionists, we want to make sure that if someone is doing this, we're talking about the nutrients that they are actually consuming during that window, not just purely for weight loss, which is oftentimes why people will choose to fast. So going into these principles, and the key benefits of fasting. Fasting has a lot of benefits, and I want to go over them in detail because there's some really interesting research about the benefits of fasting, and there's a lot of reasons why people will choose to fast. Another big part of comparative diets, then in this course that we teach, is thinking about why someone is trying a dietary application. Why is somebody trying to eat in a certain way? What's the goal? What's the outcome? And when you reframe it in that way, rather than just saying, oh, I'm going to jump on this dietary trend, we can actually think deeper of, is this dietary application going to be effective for this individual? Or are they trying this dietary application without really thinking about the end goal? Or is there a better dietary application that will help them get to their end goal? That's a big part of thinking clinically and thinking from a coaching perspective, even with our clients. Are they ready for this dietary application? Is this going to be actually beneficial for them in the long run? Are they going to be able to see the benefits that they are looking for? So let's talk about these benefits from fasting, because I'm sure you've heard about some of these benefits before, or you've heard that it's good for weight loss, it's good for blood sugar management, but let's dive into the science behind them. Fasting has some benefits for the entire body. And I could speak at length about this, but I'm going to make it short and sweet so we can get into some of the other things that I want to discuss here today. But the first one is autophagy. And this is a funny word. And autophagy is something that I like to equate to Pac-Man, hence my picture here. Autophagy is your body's way of cleaning out damaged cells. And what happens is that when we get into this period of fasting, your body starts to sense, oh, we're not getting the same amount of food coming in as we were before. What can we do about this? We have a whole bunch of stores all over our body. We have stores in our muscles. We have stores in our cells. Technically, all of our cells can be broken down for parts. So when we do not get the same amount of calories or energy coming in from proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, our body goes, what can we do here? Can we do some remodeling? And this is autophagy. It's your body's way of cleaning out damaged cells and debris in order to make use of them for parts and to just do some cleanup. So autophagy happens when we fast. It happens via a couple of different things. AMPK activation happens through DNA and mitochondrial repair and through an increase of ketone bodies. Now, what did I just say? Now, in a nutshell, AMPK activation is basically when your energy is low. AMPK acts as basically an energy sensor or a fuel gauge, and it tells the body that, okay, we are low on energy. Let's start to trigger cellular cleanup so we can access energy from other sources and just, clean up some of the debris that might be slowing us down right now. It also, when we are fasting, helps us to activate a level of something called sirtuins. And these are proteins that help to repair your DNA. Yes, repair your DNA and your mitochondrial proteins, which actually helps to support longevity. There's a lot of research around this too, that when we take care of our DNA and we take care of our mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, if you remember high school biology, this helps to increase our energy potential, our focus, our mood, and so much more because the mitochondria are found all over the body doing vast amounts of things for us. Ketones are also part of this process because after about 24 hours, our body starts to see a huge rise in these energy substrates called ketones. And they further actually upregulate autophagy while providing some protection for your cells so your body just doesn't start to eat everything. Right? It starts to say, okay, let's take care of the cells. Let's just take care of the damaged stuff. We can clean those out, but those healthy cells, let's keep them. We don't want to break those down. So ketones actually act as a protective mechanism so we don't start Pac-Manning everything that's in our body. It's my favorite example. Now, how does this actually apply to tangible things that we can think about? Autophagy is cellular cleanup. And this cellular cleanup happens everywhere. Imagine your body like an amazing city, and you have this cleaning crew that's going through and sweeping the streets and washing windows and wiping things down and recycling old timber for parts. Now, but these parts are you. So it helps to reduce inflammation systemically. We can see a drop in inflammation via blood work. We can feel less inflamed when we fast. And this is interesting in particular for the heart and for blood vessel health. So autophagy helps to protect the heart by reducing the amount of oxidative stress and inflammation, so cellular damage. And these things are the key drivers of cardiovascular disease. So really helps to reduce inflammation in the blood vessels and in the heart. It also helps to prevent the toxic buildup of certain toxic substances that happen in the brain. So autophagy as a mechanism is actually neuroprotective. And this is where the different types of fasting comes into play. There's really interesting research that shows when somebody is ready to fast for longer fast, we're talking about 24 hours to 48 hours, we see a huge boost in autophagy as well as ketone production. And this actually helps to basically clear toxic proteins from the brain. And this can reduce the risk of neurodegeneration. This can actually be quite applicable for people with Alzheimer's for both prevention and helpful just products of people who have Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. So this can help to mitigate some of that as well as prevent neurodegeneration. Autophagy, that cellular cleanup, is also helping your metabolic organs. In people with type 2 diabetes, autophagy prevents or protects the pancreatic beta cells. And those are the cells in our pancreas that actually produce insulin for us. So it helps to basically take care of our pancreatic cells and can improve our glucose regulation, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Autophagy also helps to regulate metabolism. So we can see some changes to weight management. And this can also help us access our, best way to put this would be our fat in our fat cells. So we can start to affect obesity in a positive way. There's also some potential for cancer prevention and control here. And I have a limited amount of time today, so I'm not even going to dive into that. But for anyone who's curious, I would highly recommend looking into Ruth E. Patterson's meta-analysis of intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating for cancer prevention and control via intermittent fasting. Some fascinating research. So, if autophagy is so helpful for us, then this leads us into how autophagy can and intermittent fasting can help us with metabolic health. Fasting can support metabolic health in various different ways. Autophagy, I've already mentioned, helps to protect those beta cells in our pancreas, but it also helps to regulate the way that we use sugar and carbohydrates in our liver. So it helps to regulate glycogen and triglyceride metabolism in the liver, which means that we can see changes to our A1C levels. We can see changes to our cholesterol panel that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And when we are fasting, it means that we are not intaking as much food and as frequently. So this can actually lead to reduced amounts of insulin being secreted. And as a result, because we're not secreting as much insulin, our cells can become more receptive to it. So we can actually see an increase in insulin sensitivity. This is very important for people who are diabetic or pre-diabetic. But if I'm being honest with you, and you would learn this at IHN, it's now estimated that about 2/3 of the North American population has some sort of mild to moderate insulin resistance. And what that means in a nutshell is that when your body secretes insulin, which is what helps us to bring sugar into our cells, the cell itself isn't responsive to the insulin. It's kind of ignoring it. So we can see our blood, our sugar not getting into our cells, even though insulin is being secreted. So even though this is usually discussed for diabetics or for pre-diabetics, this can be beneficial for just someone of the general population who maybe doesn't even know that they are mild to moderately insulin resistant because of the type of diet that we are exposed to on a regular basis. So what's cool about fasting is that when you are fasting, you are not intaking food, right? So you are going through a period of withholding from food. And that means that your body has to do the work itself to start to find energy from other sources. So this can basically start to see us use our own stores for energy. Our liver will be asked to unpack some forms of energy to turn that into fuel in another way. We can start to access our fat from our fat cells to turn that into fasting. And with repeated fasting cycles, the body actually can become more sensitive to insulin again. So this means a better response to insulin, lower blood glucose levels, and this can be seen via someone using a continuous glucose monitor or using their blood work by looking at their fasting glucose and their A1C. So lots of really interesting things to dive into there. Now, obviously, this can lead to weight loss because you are eating less calories and you are also asking your body to use up its own stores or access its own stores. So this can be a benefit as well because we know that when someone is carrying more adipose tissue and has more weight, essentially, this actually secretes a slow and steady hum of inflammation. This can itself lead to more insulin resistance. I have so many fun things to say, but we have to move on to the next benefit, which is gut health. Really cool studies about how, when we are fasting in a healthy way, this can actually increase our beneficial bacteria, which are in particular the ones that are supportive of blood sugar management, which is quite neat. And it can help to reduce the amount of harmful bacteria that are coming in particular proteobacteria, pardon me, that are they tend to secrete a lot of toxic material that can lead to more inflammation, more irritation in the gut. Really neat is because fasting is supporting those happy gut bacteria, we can see an enhanced amount of butyrate production. And this is a short chain fatty acid that you would learn all about in fundamentals that is a fuel source for your gut and can also increase the substrates that help to reduce inflammation. The last thing about gut health that makes fasting so helpful, even a 12-12 fast, so meaning that you will have a fasting window of 12 hours and an eating window of 12 hours, is that your body can go through something called the it would activate, pardon me, the migrating motor complex. So the MMC is this amazing internal housekeeper that we have in our gut. And it is a motility pattern that occurs in the stomach and in the small intestine and in the bowels that is interrupted every time we eat. So it's like this housekeeper that you have that only comes out when nobody's home. Food, right? And during that process of MMC, it basically wrings out your gut through these waves of peristalsis of the muscles to slough off dead cells, to get rid of bacteria, and just residue that kind of hangs out in our gut. And this only happens when we are not eating for at least 4 to 6 hours. So Fasting can also be a great way to keep those muscles active so we can actually see better bowel movements, which are super important, as well as the cleaning off of some not so nice cells or dead cells and not so nice bacteria. All right. Next piece, cardiovascular health. There's a lot of cool research around fasting improving blood pressure. So fasting has been shown to improve blood pressure by actually supporting the creation and secretion of nitric oxide, which is something that's very helpful for the blood vessels. We can also see that fasting can lower levels of LDL cholesterol. Now, I don't have time to get into this, but if you want to come and join me in the fundamentals of nutrition, we talk all about how LDL isn't necessarily super negative, but it's the ratio of LDL to HDL. But the cool thing about fasting is that fasting can actually alter the type of LDL cholesterol in a beneficial way. So it can change the density so it doesn't get stuck in your blood vessels in the same way. Fasting can also affect your triglyceride levels, which are another key indicator of cardiovascular concerns. Fasting reduces inflammation, and there's really interesting research that shows that people who fast tend to have lower amounts of CRP in their blood work, which is a kind of general marker for inflammation. We can also see that this can reduce IL-6, which is another marker that's linked to atherosclerosis and heart disease. So really interesting research there. And because everything in the body is interconnected, which I'm sure you've been learning about all morning, because fasting enhances insulin sensitivity, this also can affect the heart because excess carbohydrates can be converted into triglycerides, which can then affect the heart. And there's some really interesting research that shows, yes, because all around when we start to see a healthy weight loss, this can affect the heart because you're not putting as much stress on pumping blood. Now, one important thing that I wanted to share with you, you would learn all about research if you come to IHN, but there was a very interesting observational study, which has pros and cons because observational isn't the be all end all, but they found that people who fasted and only had an 8-hour time window of eating versus those who had a 12 or a 16-hour window, what's really interesting is that those that were fasting and only had an 8-hour eating window actually had a higher risk of death from cardiovascular disease complications than those who had a 12-hour eating window. Whoa. So I was talking about benefits, but now I'm talking about a potential limitation. Now, granted, this is observational, so we don't know what they were eating. We don't know the quality of food, but this leads me into the next piece. Is it so cut and dry? Does everybody need to be fasting to see the benefits of reducing inflammation, to see the benefits of increasing their insulin sensitivity? Not necessarily. So not all of us should be fasting. And there's a variety of different reasons for that. But I want to get into the main ones that I see commonly in practice. High stress and HPA axis dysfunction can be a sign that we should not be fasting. Here's the thing about fasting. Fasting is a normal part of existence. But if we are experiencing a fast on a cellular level, this is a stressor. Because if our body goes, oh my goodness, there's no food coming in, what now, right? This is a stress on us because from an evolutionary perspective, if we were entering a period of famine, your body would have to react. So fasting is a metabolic stressor that does activate something called the HPA axis or the I can never say this one, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. I say HPA because it's a mouthful, but this can lead to a stress response. So what that stress response means is that your body goes, oh, we're fasting. We need energy because we're not getting energy in. Let's secrete cortisol. Cortisol is a natural hormone that helps the body respond to stress. It is a normal thing. We secrete it every single day because it helps us to wake up in the morning. But we can also secrete cortisol when we are exposed to stressors, because the cool thing about cortisol is once we have that in our blood, our body goes, oh, let's make extra sugar from other sources because we need that right now. So studies show that cortisol levels do rise almost immediately after fasting begins, and they can remain elevated during the entire fast, especially if somebody is going through a long period of fasting or if they are in a severe calorie deficit. So the thing is, if we have a client who's coming in who is extremely stressed and they say, I want to fast, this might not be the best option for them because it's just another stressor in their bucket, this rain barrel that we talk about a lot at IHN. So if their window of tolerance, if their kind of bucket of stress is already too full, this extra stressor of fasting might not give them the potential benefits that they're looking for. If I want to fast because I want to lose weight, or I have diabetes and I want to fast because I've heard that it's so great for helping me become more sensitive to sugar again. Interesting to note is that for people who are under chronic stress, so this can be having very busy lives, poor sleep, emotional stress, and signs of this for yourself is maybe if you feel like you burst into tears when there's a new stress in your life, or somebody tells you something, or there's more work on your plate, or you feel like you're kind of tired and wired all the time, adding in this extra stressor might not be the ideal thing for you. The other part that's really neat that I wanted to share is that for some people, this can potentially worsen their symptoms of diabetes. So, in some cases, elevated cortisol can actually worsen someone's insulin resistance, which makes it even harder for their cells to uptake glucose. I've seen this in clients who come in who are diabetic, who were also trying fasting. And as soon as we removed the fasting and actually gave them meals that were blood sugar balancing 3 times a day while also working on sleep and stress, which I know Kareem just talked about, and that heart math piece, like listening to your emotions, we saw much better changes to their blood sugar levels in comparison to when they were just trying to fast. Because fasting is a stressor, this can also affect your hormones, in particular, your reproductive hormones, more so for women than for men, but we can see it in both male and female hormones. But this can lead to libido changes, changes in the menstrual cycle, potential change in fertility, and also hair loss. So these are some things that you might not want to be thinking about adding fasting in if these are part of your picture right now. And because fasting is a stressor, if somebody is already under so much stress, this can lead to further immune suppression because when we are stressed, our body actually suppresses some immune responses in sake of, or for the sake of trying to get into more short-term kind of end goals now of running away from the hypothetical stressor. And that could be traffic, that could be work overwhelm, that could be, taking care of little kids, whatever that is. Another thing that we need to think about for some potential limitations are certain populations should not fast. If you are in a state that demands build up versus breakdown, because fasting is a breakdown diet, we need to be mindful of the fact that when you are fasting, you will likely be having a lower amount of calories or total energy coming in for the day. So females who are pregnant or who are breastfeeding should not be fasting because their nutrient requirements are much higher. We'll learn this through nutrition in the lifespan, but the caloric requirements of a pregnant or breastfeeding female, crazy. They need so much more food to feed this new life. So they should not be fasting. People who have a history of eating disorders, either current or in the past, this can trigger worsened perspectives around this. So that's something you do want to be mindful of, that this can just exasperate that for that individual or trigger old patterns again. Individuals who are growing, so kids and teens, once again, unless there is some very particular medical consideration that someone is looking at, they're in a state of build up. They are in a period of life where we need to be giving them more than less. Females looking to conceive, there are a few exceptions to this with PCOS in some individuals. But for the most part, remember, because this is a stressor and females are far more sensitive to changes, I'm going to get to that in a moment, this could be a potential extra stressor that could lead to them having a harder time conceiving. So leading into gender specific considerations, because I know I have to be mindful of time here, but as you can see, I could talk about this for hours. We have a whole lecture on this for about 3.5 hours during comparative diets, but I do need to make the differentiation between male and female hormones here. Most of the research that was initially done on fasting, and even in the last 15, 20 years, was done on men, usually college-age males. So then that was translated into everybody. But here's the thing. Female hormones respond differently to fasting than male hormones. The really interesting research around this, if you are interested, would be Dr. Stacy Sims. She's a fantastic researcher around this and does some pretty interesting stuff around how if somebody does want to fast, they can do that. But she usually speaks about not fasting for females, in particular those who are athletic. But females of reproductive age, meaning they have not gone through menopause yet, because female hormones are fluctuating constantly through the course of a 28 typically day cycle, we are very sensitive to changes in caloric intake because this is another stressor. If we do not have enough calories coming in, we hypothetically cannot conceive. Even if you don't want to conceive, your cells are kind of thinking about, okay, do we have enough energy coming in to maintain our hormones? So fasting can increase HPA axis dysfunction. It can lead to more stress. It's another stress in the bucket. And we need to make sure that we feel safe, right? Even though you might feel safe as a human, your cells might feel that there's not enough food coming in. Females, though, are very interesting because they are more metabolically flexible. And what's really cool about fasting is it can actually allow you to use more fat as fuel versus carbohydrates as fuel, which is a really neat piece of fasting. But because female hormones and just females are more sensitive to glucose availability and caloric availability, this can be a downside if they're not getting enough calories in and the right amount of calories in. So there's some potentials for working with the fasting at different points in this cycle and also modulating the macronutrients, so your proteins, your carbs, and fats, depending on what phase of the menstrual cycle you're in. Because, fun fact for you, at different points in the cycle, you actually are more fat adaptive versus carbohydrate adaptive. Really neat. And side note, fasting can impair training and exercise goals for both males and females, but in particular for females, because fasting is a stressor. So, what can we do about this? I could speak about this for hours, but in a quick nutshell, the recommendations by the topmost experts on this, and I'll give you the names of Stacy Sim, Dr. Aviva Ram, and Dr. Jolene Brighton as a few, mention that if someone were to want to try intermittent fasting as a female, you don't skip breakfast. You would want to try and opt for a 10 to 12 hour eating window to start. And you'd want to break your fast in the morning and then decide to, okay, stop eating after dinner. So rather than having this window of, let's say, 12 to 10, you'd want to flip it. So you actually start to break your fast in the morning. And then after dinner, that's when you stop eating. So this tends to help support healthy cortisol regulation. You also want to be more flexible with it rather than being rigid about every single day having this fasting pattern. You need to be more flexible and alter the fast during different phases of the menstrual cycle because there's a little bit less tolerance for stress in the luteal phase and the menstrual phase. So there's a caloric requirement shifts here as well. In the luteal phase, you actually need a bit more calories, which is interesting, and your tolerance to stress does shift. You may consider cyclical fasting, meaning that you are not fasting every single day. You might be doing a crescendo fast. So you would fast one day and then not fast and then fast the next day. And you would kind of have this different window. And they typically recommend a 12-12 is a safe place to be. When you break your fast, you want to make sure that you break it with a protein dense meal and with healthy fats and fiber, which I will get to as we get into the next little few slides here, but never anything that would be extremely carbohydrate based because this can spike your blood sugar. We'll go through that more. And the goal is whether you are male or female, you want to make sure that you're listening to your body and listening to if you might need some extra carbohydrates. Now, the last thing I'll mention here, because I think I took it off my slide, is that there is a slight differentiation between women or females who are pre-menopause versus post. There's some cool research that shows that menopausal females can see some more benefits from fasting, but you also have to think about life stress because in that phase of life, there are some people who just have had more stress. So are we going to add this extra stressor, or are they in a place from a mental emotional point of view that they can actually handle the fasting stressor, which could then help with their insulin resistance or their cholesterol markers, etc. Last couple thoughts here before we get into, okay, from a holistic point of view, how can we make some changes? What are your goals? when we think about that client that's sitting across from us, we have to think about their goals. If their goals are to increase their muscle mass, fasting might not be for them because you have a smaller window. You have to be mindful that you're getting enough protein in, that you are fueling yourself around your strength training, because this can lead to your body actually, in a fasting state, pulling from your muscles as a source of energy. So muscle mass may be lost during intermittent fasting unless you are very mindful of how you are refueling. And if they have strength goals, fasting might not be the best option for them. If they have body recomposition goals, then we might be able to incorporate some fasting in there, but just know that it's not going to be the tool that would be best suited for that person who wants to put on muscle mass, because that is also a build up phase. We go through all of that in comparative diets. This can be a setback for social connection. So if someone's eating one meal a day, this can put a damper on family gatherings. This could put a damper on social connections, etc. So be mindful of what that person's goals are, and what are you actually eating during that window. That's what we're going to get into when we get into the terms of holistic nutrition approaches to fasting. Because while there are benefits of just fasting in general, how can you get the most out of that window? Because you are a function of what you eat, right? You are what you eat and you metabolize. And that's how we actually can create muscle and create our brain tissue and create the molecules that actually help to reduce inflammation. We need to get nutrients in, not just calories. And we have to think about the window. Is it the right window that's causing more stress or less stress? So, last thing before we get into my few slides on how we as holistic nutritionists can help really get the most out of fasting is, let's listen to these warning signs. I spend a lot of time in my practice helping people cut through the noise of, should I do this or should I do that, or this work for my friend or this work for my partner, and actually have people listen to their own body signals. We spend so much time being outside of our bodies and listening to the world around us rather than listening to what our body has to say. So in the case of fasting, your body will have some signals for you that will tell you, hey, this isn't working for me. Even though I know you're trying really hard to break your fast at noon, I can't do this. So if you feel constantly fatigued, if you feel dizzy or faint, you feel faint, or you feel lightheaded, in particular when you go from sitting to standing after starting a fasting approach, this might not be right for you. If you feel like you have developed headaches or irritability, if you feel like you are less able to cope with stress, then fasting might not be right for you. If you've noticed that after starting intermittent fasting, you have difficulty concentrating, if you feel like you see changes to your sleep, you feel more agitated, you feel like you're waking up in the middle of the night, these are signs that this might not be right for you. If you have menstrual cycle irregularities, this might not be right for you. That's a personal story that I experienced. I used to fast 12 to 8 many years before attending IHN, and it changed my menstrual cycle, even though I was on birth control at the time. So that was my body signal saying, hey, this is not right for me. If you notice unintended weight loss, so rapid weight loss that feels dangerous, unsafe, or muscle loss, you're seeing that you don't have the same amount of muscle mass, you feel like you have very poor recovery to exercise, you feel like the gym, you just can't get through a workout, or you feel extremely sore after working with fasting, this might not be right for you. And if we start to see hair loss or changes to libido, also some signs that fasting might not be right for you. Or we could see maybe it's just what you're eating during that window. So that's where it becomes very much holistic and person centered, not just masses centered or the population centered. So as we come to a close here, we need to think about this from a holistic perspective. Here's the thing. There are a ton of diets out there, and we go through a lot of them in comparative diets. You can punch stuff into Chat GPT now and say, I want to do intermittent fasting, give me this. But that doesn't know you. ChatGPT doesn't know who you are as an individual. And that's where working with a holistic nutritionist or understanding more about these principles, if you decide to study at IHN, can be so helpful. Because here's the thing, the food that you eat literally becomes who you are. It becomes your hair, your skin, your nails, your cells. So we need to think about how we can best feed ourselves during that window to get the most out of that fast if you decide to fast, because it can make a world of difference to the benefits of fasting if you decide that fasting is right for you. So here are my top recommendations using holistic nutrition principles. If you decide after all of this, yes, I'm game to try intermittent fasting, make sure to think about what you are fueling yourself with. So, number one, you want to try to break the fast with breakfast. Consider an earlier start than what we read about online about having that 12 or 1 or 2 p.m. Breaking of the fast. Try aligning it with your circadian rhythms to prevent further cortisol spikes. Eat in alignment with your natural clock. Ideally, when you wake up and there's sun, you start to eat. And when we start to wind down in the evening, then you stop. You want to break your fast in the morning. The meal content is the next thing that matters. Here's the thing. I don't have time to get into all of the macronutrients, but I could talk about that for hours and you learn all about it in fundamentals. But we don't need calories. We need proteins, carbohydrates, and fat, and fiber, and vitamins, and minerals. Your body loves when your blood sugar is regulated. Protein and fat are ways to help regulate our blood sugar. So if you were to break your fast with a croissant versus if you were to break your fat, let's say with some fish or some soft boiled eggs or some, tempeh or tofu with a little bit of healthy fat from some avocado and some greens, you're going to feel wildly different than having a croissant because that croissant will then lead to you wanting to eat more, et cetera, et cetera. So you do want to make sure you are eating real whole foods and focusing on meals that are going to be blood sugar balancing, preferably with about 25 to 30 grams of protein, a little bit of healthy fats, usually about a couple thumbfuls would be helpful, and some lower glycemic index carbohydrates. So some great examples of that could be some steamed veggies, maybe some legumes, maybe some berries if you like a sweeter breakfast. And this can be a great way to break that fast in a healthy blood sugar balancing way that's nourishing to your cells, not just to your calorie counter. Then, when you are eating, you want to avoid those ultra processed foods because they will have a calorie count for your day, but they won't have the nutritional value that your body is looking for. And when you're eating, the mindfulness piece matters so much. You want to go slow and listen and really pay attention when you're eating because this helps to improve digestion, especially if you are going for a longer fast. If you have fasted for 24 hours, you actually want to start with a slower meal, a smaller meal, and be very present because you have fasted for 24 hours and your body needs some time to go, oh, we should be eating again. Let's ramp up digestion. You also want to make sure that you are drinking water at all times. That's a big part that people forget, is that you want to make sure you're hydrating. And in your eating window, you want to be building these nutrient-dense meals to ensure that in that window, you are getting adequate amounts of the raw material that your body needs to not just function, but to thrive. So we're looking at enough protein, carbs, fats, vitamins, and minerals to ensure a healthy blood sugar response, but also that you have that material to feel good and thrive. So we've gone through a ton today, and I want to just see if there's any questions left because I know I went slightly over time, but I hope you've learned a little bit more about the various types of fasting that exist, the benefits of fasting, because there are so many, the potential limitations and variations that can be considered for different genders, and how we can use the principles of holistic nutrition to help make that window, that fasting window, as nutrient dense as possible. And if you found this really interesting, as Elizabeth mentioned, I teach a couple of courses here at IHN. I am super passionate about teaching, giving people the tools they need to have that aha moment that it's not just about black and white nutrition. It's really about the client that's sitting in front of you or you personally. And we take that all into consideration at IHN. So if this was interesting to you, please reach out because we'd love to have you on our virtual campus.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you.
Oh, that was a wonderful presentation and very balanced. It's so important to consider, who fasting is good for and which
Yes,
segment of the population that has to really look at it and see a practitioner and see if this is the right choice for them. Absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah. And we have some questions for you.
All right. I
Okay, so we
see.
have someone here practices time restricted fasting.
Mhm.
So they'll eat at 11 and then 6, and some days they eat once per day. They're planning on getting pregnant. Is this the best approach to continue this routine?
Great question. I would say that for most people, I would recommend not fasting while trying to conceive from a stress management point of view, even though you yourself might have become habitualized to fasting. From a cellular perspective, it can still be seen as a stressor. This can be affecting hormones in various ways. And if conception is the goal for you right now, whether or not your cells might notice, okay, there's a time issue here of when we're getting food, or there's not enough of certain things coming in potentially because of that window. This might not be the right time for us to conceive. That might not feel safe for your cells. So having a nourishing, dense breakfast, you could still maybe go for a 12-hour fast if you wanted to. So if you do 12-hour eating window, 12-hour fast, so you push that forward a little bit and give yourself a very nourishing, nutrient dense breakfast, that would be what I would recommend. I would not recommend continuing with fasting while trying to conceive.
Yeah. Yeah. Great, great advice.
Awesome presentation, by the way, Sidney.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And is IF recommended for perimenopause? Still menstruating mid-50s?
Yes, great question. So this is where we get into the answer of it depends. And I love this answer, even though I know it frustrates my students to no end, is because you have to think about the person sitting in front of you. Let's say if somebody is perimenopausal, but they're at a point in life where they have great sleep, they have great digestion, their stress is low, they're exercising well, and we add that in, that stressor of fasting, that might be beneficial for them. But if we have someone else who's coming in who they've told me has just gotten a divorce, they're working on their retirement, they're very stressed, and they also want to add in intermittent fasting because they've got some weight around the middle that has been frustrating them, or they've been diagnosed with fatty liver, or they've had some elevated cholesterol, that might not be the right option for them because there's other potential stressors that are going to just, there's a lot in the bucket there. So that might be better to actually give them more of a nourishing plan that helps their cells feel safe. And that's what we really get into in comparative diets, as well as other courses at IHN, is it's not just the physical body of this person is in perimenopause. We have to think about it from the mind, body, soul connection piece and from the just balance of their life to see if this dietary application is actually going to serve them or hinder them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, fantastic. Absolutely. It's never cut and dry and never cookie cutter. We have
Mm-mm.
over 650 different symptoms of the body, and yeah, it can go even more to 750 different questions before you can get down to what is truly happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Marianne says, thank you so much, Sidney, for sharing your amazing knowledge with us. So
Thank
cool how
you.
fasting can have such an impact on our health and well-being. Learned so much
Mhm.
today.
Yeah.
And I see the questions are starting to flood in here. People have had a chance to, as people have had a chance to kind of digest it. So, from Caroline, my guess is fasting maybe is not good for a person with autoimmune conditions like Graves.
I would agree. Yes. So if someone who has, I mean, when we look at autoimmune conditions in general, there's a lot, like there's a lot going on with autoimmune conditions. But with something like Graves' disease, that would not be a recommendation by any means. If we look at the mechanisms of action behind that, as well as the mental, emotional pieces around an autoimmune condition like Graves', that extra stressor of fasting might not be the right tool for that individual. If you'll talk about this in psychology of disease as well, but you want to be looking at build up, grounding, safety rather than an extra stressor like fasting.
Mhm. Yeah.
As someone working to eradicate H. pylori with a naturopath,
Mhm.
would fasting be beneficial?
Oh, potentially. Potentially. So H. pylori is an interesting one, and there's so many applications or like ways that you can work with H. pylori, but having less exposure or less meals could potentially be a help. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that you are secreting adequate levels of stomach acid uh, to retrain that after after the H. pylori protocol is done. So this is where it gets once again into the it depends. It could be part of the protocol depending on what phase you're in, but you would want to ask your naturopath whether or not they think that you are at the right phase to be limiting the amount of food and like the window versus do they want you having more secretion of stomach acid and like and getting your body to activate that because H. pylori can affect your stomach acid levels. So that's where we get into the shades of gray. And that's where it's great that you're working with a practitioner to ask, is this at the right phase? Am I at the right phase of this protocol to do this? But yes, potentially.
Mhm.
Awesome. And then Julia asks, in all of the content that is out there on the internet, what is your opinion on when one actually gets into autophagy when fasting?
Oh, that is a great question. So when you look at it, it's usually like 12 to 24 hours is when we, sorry, pardon me, 24 hours is when we start to see pardon me, I was thinking 12 to 24 for something else. It's 24 hours is when we start to see autophagy really occur. And I attended a very interesting lecture on this from someone who is very well versed in the world of Alzheimer's and neurodegeneration. And he was talking about the benefits of autophagy for Alzheimer's in particular. But he was mentioning that with his patients, he would get them to fast when they were ready. He would like talk about building people up and like getting them ready for these things. But that 12 or 24 to 48-hour fast for autophagy in particular would be used at a certain point. So from his point of view, which I trust because he's quite a leader in it, would be 24 hours when we start to see the benefits of autophagy really start to occur. So that's when you start to think about the longer term fasts, but then you also have to think about how you're walking yourself into a fast like that and how you're walking yourself out of a fast like that, because it's not quite the same as time restricted eating where you just have a great meal with 30 grams of protein in a big plate. You want to ease yourself into a little bit of soft, easy to digest food and like walking in and out. But yes, the autophagy about 24 to 48 hours.
Cool.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I know Elizabeth found a winner for your prize, but I don't know that we
We didn't
communicated
talk
the
about
prize,
it.
did we?
No, we did not.
Okay, so what is
So
it?
the prize is a 45-minute, what I call collaborative call. So this is an opportunity for us to work together to dive into one health goal that you have. And then we're going to map it out together. So this is a little bit different than a clinical session. I really want this to be collaborative, and I'll send you all the information about it. But in that 45-minute session, we're going to give you a mini roadmap of how you can get started. Because in my practice, I really believe in adding in the things that are missing first rather than taking things away. So we'll work together to see what first tools can we add to your toolbox to get you one step or maybe even 2 or 3 or 5 steps closer to that wellness goal using nutrition, lifestyle recommendations, and supplements.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah, we
Mhm.
love that. And we would like to congratulate Melissa is the winner for Sydney's beautiful gift today.
Mhm.
So Melissa, Sydney will be in touch via email. Congratulations. And thank you so much to everyone that attended Sydney's talk today. Sydney, that was fantastic, very thorough. Thank you so much for being with us today as well. And we look forward to seeing you in your next course.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope everyone enjoyed the session and the open house here for IHN.
Thanks, Sydney.
Take care.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Sydney. Bye bye.